So welcome everybody to episode 129 of Level Up, 60 minutes, of course, of live Q&A, where your questions really do drive the show. Ella and Shanice are actually over in the chat today, so do please let them know your name and, of course, the city from where you're joining. We're going to post a link into that chat so that you can vote up the questions that you would most like answered, and, of course, for you to be able to add your own. Now, if your question is selected, and many will be, your name's going to appear in the credits at the end of the show. So do get your questions in early and stay with us to see all of that happening. Today, we're going to be talking about organizational culture and in particular, how to build a culture of inclusivity in teams and across organizations. Now, Deloitte have helpfully published some research that just demonstrates how essential inclusion is for engaging and retaining today's workforce. They asked candidates who were applying for jobs a series of questions, and 80% of them stated that it's really important when they were selecting an employer to apply for and whether or not to accept a job offer ultimately. So look, if we all want it, if we all want an inclusive workplace, why is it so tricky to be able to truly deliver on that desire? Well, to answer that question, and of course all of your questions too, we've got a really wonderful panel joining us today. So let's jump straight in and meet them all. Daniëlle Hellebrand is the owner and CEO at BetterBrains at Work, where she focuses on applying discoveries in neuroscience to help teams and organizations improve and recognize the value of the social brain at work. So welcome back to Level Up, Daniëlle. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Nick. And good morning to the other panelists and to everyone who is participating and listening. I'm looking forward to learn a lot from the other panelists and to the always beautiful questions of the audience.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Daniëlle. Thank you for joining us. Also joining us today from Melbourne in Australia is Malini Jayaganesh. She is, of course, a business relationship manager who specializes in nurturing high-performance teams. But you may not know that in the public sector organization where she works, she also leads the Women of Colour Network. A personal inspiration to me and to many others, Malini brings her authentic self to every situation. Welcome back to the panel, Malini.
Thank you, Nick, and hello to my fellow panelists and everyone who's tuned in to be part of this conversation from around the world.
Excellent. Thank you indeed. Dianne Rampadarath is, of course, a regular contributor here on the panel of Level Up. And as the Assistant Director for the Public Service in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, she carefully crafts her engagement with a diverse range of stakeholders to deliver sustainable development programs. So welcome back to the panel, Dianne. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Nick, and APMG International for the opportunity to again appear on the panel to discuss this very important topic. As organizations prepare to continue functioning in a future's work environment, inclusivity as a social responsibility is one of the factors that can contribute to success and help them achieve a sustainable competitive advantage. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting show and also learning from my fellow panelists, as always.
Absolutely. And thank you, Dianne. We've got a huge number of people on social already online. So we're going to be introducing some of you in a little while. So thank you very much. Do type your name and, of course, the city from where you're joining in the chat, because I am geographically challenged. So I do find it tricky, if you don't tell us where you're from, to be able to make those connections. Laurie Bowman next. His career has spanned management and leadership roles in complex multidiscipline engineering and construction projects, and he's now responsible for project portfolio planning and control, of course, at Synchrony projects. Laurie knows firsthand the talent that inclusive approaches can tap into for teams and for organizations. Welcome to the panel, Laurie.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's very good to be here, and welcome audience members and fellow panelists.
And it's lovely to see a fellow Australian joining Malini today as well, although I think that you're in a different city. Whereabouts in Australia are you, Laurie?
That's correct. I'm in Brisbane. So it's lovely and warm up here in Brisbane just at the moment.
All right. Okay. A little cooler, I think, maybe in Melbourne, but we'll come on to the weather a wee bit later on. Adrian Pyne completes our panel. He is Director of Consulting at Pyne Consulting and Head of Governance at a new cancer research organisation, which is just in its starting stages, called My Melanoma. An accomplished author and fellow of the Association of Project Management, Adrian has made a significant contribution to advancing the agile movement way beyond the world of IT. And he also has a strong background in diversity and inclusion in the public sector. Welcome to Level Up, Adrian. Great to have you on board.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I'm again looking forward to working with great panel and a nice huge audience out there. It's going to be amazing today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much indeed. Completing our team on camera at least today is Suchitra Jacob. She is our question master for today, who's joining us from Bangalore in India. So, Suchitra, great to see you. Did you have a nice weekend?
Hello, Nick, and hi, panelists. Yeah, I had a great weekend, and I'm definitely looking forward to today's show.
Excellent. All right. Well, very good. Well, lots of folks are online. We're going to come to you guys in a moment or two. But Suchitra, I think it's going to be pretty busy today. So let's jump straight in and start off with our first question, please.
To start us off with, our first question is from our panelist, Adrian. What is the difference, if any, between inclusivity and diversity?
That's a really good question, because these two words are often used in the same sentences. Daniëlle, start us off, and then we'll hear from Dianne.
Well, I think diversity, it's a numbers game. You can mandate diversity. Inclusion, however, is something you do intentionally, things you start doing. You must cultivate inclusion if you are very serious about this subject.
Thank you very much indeed. Dianne, let's come to you next, and then we'll hear from Laurie.
Diversity looks at the makeup of your organization, for example, age, gender, while inclusivity looks at how valued, appreciated, and welcomed employees feel. So there isn't too much difference, but really one complements the other, because to have diversification, you need to have inclusivity in your organization.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. It's quite interesting, this, isn't it? As we start to dig into this, language becomes super important. Very good. Thank you very much, Dianne. Laurie, your thoughts, and then Malini.
Yes, so I agree with Dianne. It's really, I guess, to use a metaphor, if you're cooking, diversity is to have a very wide range of ingredients in your pantry, in your fridge. Inclusion is the extent to which you pull in those ingredients and make something that's rich and enjoyable as a meal, for example. So, yeah, inclusion is really making good use. How do you use that diversity that you have available to you?
I love that allegory. Thank you so much indeed, Laurie. Yeah, I'm with you on there. Food is an important part of my life as well. So you've got me there. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Malini, your thoughts, please, and then we'll go to Adrian.
I'd actually continue on the theme of metaphors. Someone once beautifully explained to me that the difference between diversity and inclusion, diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think, Nick, you had a similar saying the last time we spoke on this topic as well.
I did, and I think that these are really good, ways to keep it in our minds, how to actually go about delivering on this. So it's a great question, and it's a lovely, as you say, metaphor to be able to use in real life. Being invited to the party is one thing, but actually to be asked to dance is quite another. It's really, really good. Thank you so much. Adrian, you posed a question to the panel. What are your thoughts on and reflections on this question in particular?
Well, I think it's great. I think especially Laurie and Malini. I like to think of diversity as the what and inclusivity as the how, which I think fits in with what they said. I'll slightly disagree with Daniëlle because I think it's absolutely critical for an organization to actually reflect its understanding of its diverse workforce in what it's doing to create deliberately the organization culture it needs. And I'm sure we'll return to that theme.
Yeah, I'm sure that we will as well. And excellent start to the show, panel. Thank you so much indeed. And what a brilliant question to get us going. Now, I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to some of the folks who are joining us online. And we will do that, I think, after the next question. Oh, no, we're going to do it now. So, Anya, I hope that I've pronounced your first name properly. From Hailing Island, which here's a little quiz for you if you're online, actually. Which country is Hailing Island part of? Now, I do actually know the answer to that question, but not everybody who's watching online may do so. So, Anya, really great to have you as part of the show today. And we have Wandima, who's a regular viewer joining us from Ethiopia. Brilliant to have you online again. Thank you so much indeed. And Anamdi, I think, apologies, my lens just twisted slightly. I wear contact lenses, so I couldn't quite read that. So, Amandi, thank you so much. Good morning. Watching from Abuja again in Nigeria. Again, a regular viewer, as is Idara, who rejoins us today as well. So lovely to have you all online. And we're coming to the end of these. So, VK, thank you so much for joining from the western side of India. And Anya, thank you very much indeed for sharing the answer so quickly. She's right in there with the questions and the answers. Anya, we're going to talent management will be inviting you onto the panel anytime soon, okay? Because you're reacting really fast. So thank you so much indeed, everybody, for joining. Suchitra, we've got questions stacking up. I can see live questions coming in already, so we best move on. Let's take our next question, please.
Our next question is from Jan. What steps can we take to acknowledge and hopefully overcome unconscious bias in both employees and organization policies?
Okay, Dianne, start us off, please, and then we'll hear from Laurie.
So first, I think we need to acknowledge that we all have unconscious bias. It's how we exhibit that bias is what can create a challenge or an issue in the organization. So some of the ways to address unconscious bias, you can try to widen your social circle by interacting with persons from diverse cultures, diverse backgrounds, so that you learn a lot more about them and their cultures and lifestyles. Also, the organization can also develop policies to address these type of biases.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to do, to be able to create those opportunities for people to work together. And it's through that working together that you get a much better understanding, a much deeper understanding of different people's cultures. It's an absolute privilege to do that. Thank you very much, Dianne. Laurie, your thoughts, then we'll go to Malini.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it really does lead right into diversity and inclusion, because the very act of being inclusive and having a diverse range of viewpoints really does help mitigate some of these unconscious biases. There's a phenomenon referred to as the wisdom of the crowds, which basically says the broader the range of input getting, the more likely it is that the decisions that are made are going to be reasonably accurate. In terms of processes, well, through governance processes on projects and change initiatives is the opportunity where you can include criteria that, people from different phases of a project, from design and planning, implementation and operation, can have a level of buy-in to a process, as well as some of the other disciplines for some of the social and environmental factors, such as operational health and safety, stakeholder relationships, and environmental considerations. So just by having processes that mandate that different representation needs to be part of decision-making, we really can help reduce the risk of that unconscious bias that we all have.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. I think there is a role for setting up frameworks and leading and in your language, mandating. I think there's also a role that says you need to live the culture that you wish to see, and so therefore you're almost drawing people forward towards that end goal a little bit, if you like. Malini, your thoughts, please, and then we'll hear from Adrian.
I concur with Dianne that it all starts with actually acknowledging that we do have unconscious bias, and everyone has some measure of unconscious bias. I think where it would be really helpful as a next step is helping people to surface their unconscious bias, right? And a very simple way is if you look at organizational policies or practices, and wherever we tend to default to this must be the way we do things around here, or this should be, challenge that. Why not take a different approach, right? What is it that actually holds us to this template of how we must do things?
It's a really good point. Thank you very much indeed. Adrian, your thoughts, then we'll hear from Daniëlle.
Yeah, yes, I'll just, on top of everything that's been said already, I'll take, if you like, the training and personal development thing. For young people coming into the organization and ongoing training, this should be part of the sort of personal development, the training people get in working with teams, being part of a team, leading a team, along with a whole bunch of other factors as well, listening skills, learning collaboration, etc. So it's about you build culture by building and sustaining behaviors. So that's one way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. Daniëlle, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think a lot of things have been said. If you are human and you have a brain, you have bias. And to work on awareness about the fact that we are biased, to learn people to listen to each other and have the opportunity to have situations where we can really dive into a conversation and really listen to each other and to make each other aware of the fact that we have biases and the importance of listening, deep listening. I think that's a very important key ingredient.
Yeah, it is really super important. I think as well, a lot has been said by the panel talking about organizations in general, and then also early career people were mentioned. I'd also stress the importance of working with senior people in organizations, senior leadership teams, who genuinely may be unconscious about how this kind of bias creeps into day-to-day life and expectations. If you're running a sales organization, you may have a very strong cadence with that, a discipline around, certain activities happening and, during the month or during the quarter. If you're in finance, you'll be similarly governed by certain events. If you're in the public sector, it may be that you have stakeholder engagement meetings at different points in the calendar. And these all drive the organization in a particular way. Our unconscious bias needs addressing at all levels, I would suggest, in an organization. So I just want to kind of shout out a little bit for those of us who are working or reporting into senior leadership teams to consider that and find a way to tap into their awareness and build their awareness, if you like, so that they become a little more conscious. Because that could really, really help. Excellent question. Thank you so much, Jan, for submitting it. A huge amount of upvotes for that question, 6 as well. So it's a really popular question to have at the beginning of the show. Suchitra, I can see live questions coming in from the audience. So let's move on and take our next question, please.
Our next question is from Bondimo, who's watching us live. What is the hardest part of building a culture of inclusivity?
Okay, Adrian, now you've been involved in this right at the heart of it. So why don't you start us off and then we'll hear from Dianne.
Thank you. It's it's getting the board on board. I'm a great fan of the management guru Drucker, who basically said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Whether he did or not is neither here nor there. But if the board don't lead and sustain the organization culture they want to see, then you'll probably end up with the culture that you don't want, and one that could be destructive. So to get the culture of inclusivity has to be driven head and heart by the board.
That's a lovely expression. I'm going to make a note of that. Head and heart. Excellent. Thank you so much indeed, Adrian. Dianne, your thoughts, please, then Daniëlle.
In building a culture of inclusivity, you also need to build a culture of psychological safety, where employees have a safe space to express themselves and express their opinion. And in building psychological safety, you try to avoid blame, you build trust, and you encourage a consultative approach to leadership. Although easy to say, it can be a challenge to implement. So I would say that's probably one of the more difficult parts.
I think you're right. You need that construct, don't you? You need to actually set out to create those safe environments, be less judgmental, and allow people, the space and the time, importantly, to be able to express their thoughts, and ideas. Really, really important. Thank you very much indeed, Dianne. So let's go to Daniëlle next, please, and then we'll hear from Laurie.
Mm-hmm. Psychological safety is very, very important, but you have to also go a bit more into cognitive elaboration and explain and create awareness that different people see the world different. And this cognitive perspective taking is exhausting for the brain. It's hard work. The brain is built to see things that are very hard as a kind of a threat response. So I think, first of all, it's important to work on inclusion, because if you just have a diverse team and say, now, we're diverse, good luck, be successful, that's creating chaos. So living and really breathing that feeling of inclusivity and psychological safety, I think it's key.
It's interesting, this, isn't it? And I agree with you. Trying to understand how, our brains work and our reactions to things and our emotional responses to things. And emotion for a long time in Western business, Western culture and business was something to be suppressed, was something to be put to one side, that you were encouraged to take the emotion out of business, and that was seen as the desired professional behavior. So it's quite interesting, really, that at this stage of my career, all of this is kind of coming back up to the front and saying, no, surface some more of that emotion, understand emotionally what is actually going on. It's incredibly insightful. Thank you very much indeed. Laurie, your thoughts, please, and then Malini.
I guess the only thing I would add is, on top of the psychological safety, is having empathy. So realizing when you take team members out of their silo, you're removing a safety barrier that they have in place. So they're going to be dealing with issues they haven't had to deal with before, confronted with perspectives that they haven't had to deal with before, and understanding that it's going to be a slower and maybe a little bit slower and more of a learning process up front, but the long-term benefit really pays off. So helping people go through a new way of doing things that at first might be a little bit confronting for them.
Yeah, understand that entirely. Thank you very much indeed, Laurie. Malini, final thoughts on this?
Timu, based on my lived experience as a woman of color in Australia, and I worked in organizations that, try to build a culture of inclusivity. I think one of the hardest things that I've noticed is this disconnect between the intention and the idea, of an inclusive organization and actually making that an everyday reality, for the people who need to be included, right? And these everyday behaviors, especially behaviors that are role modeled by senior leadership, etc. These are, the building blocks towards building that culture. And sometimes these just end up becoming a checklist of compliance.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've read many annual reports from large organizations, and mostly online these days, to be honest, but they spend a great deal of time, first of all, putting caveats around, of course, any kind of statement that may later on be relied upon, but also in there, you see the very best. You see the presentation layer of the organization. But I'm wondering how many of those glossy brochures are representative, truly representative of people's everyday working lives inside those organizations. What is the moment of truth, for us as individuals? If our manager or our the leaders of our organization say these words, what is our lived experience, to use Malini's phrase, day to day in our organizations? And can we, as individual contributors or team leaders or managers, wherever in our organizations, can we assist? Can we help in some way to deliver better outcomes for all of us? So really great and fascinating today. So thank you so much, Wandimo. That was a brilliant question to ask at this stage in the show. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Suchitra, let's move on. We'll take our next question, please.
We have another live question from Anya. What do you think about using tools to help teams recognize unconscious bias?
It's quite interesting, isn't it, Anya? Because early on in my career, we had a whole plethora of surveys and tools that people were encouraged to do, from learning about whether you're an extrovert through to figuring out how your natural behaviour is in a team situation. Malini, what are your thoughts on using tools?
I think tools definitely have a role to play, right? Because earlier on, Dianne, you rightly pointed out that the first step is actually becoming aware and acknowledging that we do have unconscious bias. So tools do help us to surface that and become more aware about our blind spots. However, tools need to be used with caution, because we don't want to fall into other new stereotypes or new templates of seeing the world. So you're replacing, one that's one for the other.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. There's a feeling, isn't there, when you're kind of struggling against the current of a fast-flowing river to grab onto the nearest floating object. Okay, that may or may not help if you're heading towards a waterfall. Daniëlle, what are your thoughts on this? Are the tools available? Are they good to use, or do you really need to know what you're doing when you're using?
You need to know a few things. I think briefings are important, that we all learn to speak the same language and walk the talk. There are learning nuggets. I think what's also very helpful are work sessions, teamwork sessions, where there are one-on-one conversations, maybe call it also reverse mentoring, whether it's with the younger generations, with the older generations, vice versa, and really deeply listening to each other. And I think listening circles facilitate insight-rich dialogues to let people better understand each other's experience and where we come from, because we all have our upbringings, our history, the part of the world we come from, etc., etc. So I think really having the time to listen to each other and facilitate that is also very important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if I might do a little bit of a shout out, throughout my career so far, one of the core skills that has been underdeveloped in many people and in many organizations is facilitation. Finding people and helping them build a range of facilitation techniques is super helpful. You can solve business problems faster. You can bring people together better. Every meeting does not have to be an information broadcast meeting. So much more interesting, so much more valuable if you actually invest in facilitation. So there's just a thought for you. If you're joining us online, we need more great facilitators. We really, really do. So please do have a little think about that. Suchitra, before we take our next question, actually, I do want to put this question from Anya back to the audience who are online. So what do you think, audience? Okay. Do you think it's good to use tools? Would you say yes to that? Yes to tools? Or would you say caution? All right. So which would you pick out of those two words? Would you say yes to using tools to help teams recognize unconscious bias? Or would you say they come with a health warning? There's a little bit of caution needed. So type those words into the chat if you would do. And Suchitra, while they're doing that, let's move on and take our next question, please.
We have another live question from Leon Thomas. Being invited to a party and being asked to dance, great description. How can an organization implement methods that help teams find a diamond in the rough?
Okay, well, Leon, I'm going to take your question in the positive. I'm going to say, how can you recognize talent amongst a sea of talent? All right, this kind of outstanding talent, if you like. Dianne, start us off if you would do, please.
So inclusivity can be included as a core value in your organization so that it shows to all employees that it's a priority that the organization is focusing on. But inclusivity, in addition to being a core value, is also a way of thinking and allowing employees to feel valued, respected, and appreciated. And when this happens, you tend to find that employees are more creative, they develop more innovative solutions, and you can actually, from that, you can pick employees who are actually very good at doing a particular aspect. So inclusivity can encourage people to be their best selves.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on there. Thank you very much indeed, Dianne. Adrian, your thoughts, and then Daniëlle.
Just really slightly adding to the last, really, as I'm a great believer, as I said earlier, in building in to the organization's personal and organizational development approach, the development of whatever skills, knowledge, capabilities, behaviors, etc., are required. So if and you do find as you're developing people that they will shine in certain areas and certain capabilities, whether it's leadership, project management, or whatever else. And if you can have built in a way of recognizing people who are particularly good at leading and encouraging inclusivity, diversity, then you can develop those people in those areas if that's a way they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. It's very, very important to recognize people's strength and encourage that, and coach those strengths forwards. Excellent. Thank you so much. Daniëlle, then Laurie.
I agree, Adrian. And research shows that about 10% of the people are really deep collaborators, people who have really this collaborative, inclusive thing in their DNA. And if you have a few people in your team and you recognize them, they help the other people, get over the fence and also have this, spread this feeling of inclusivity and collaboration. So you need a few people, and also on the front, who do you recruit? Who do you recruit? Be aware that you take people in who are very collaborative. And just one thing, I was thinking about another quote: diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. And all that needs, as Dianne said, psychological safety.
It's very true, isn't it, about this connection between the voice and this sense of being listened to. To be truly heard in an organization is another step forward. And perhaps that might be evidence that your culture is starting to take hold when you can connect all of those dots together. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Laurie, your thoughts, please, and then Malini.
Okay. Well, the only thing I would add to that is really it becoming a leadership behaviour where leaders are recognising and rewarding that type of behaviour, and even having it as part of the organisational narrative. So storytelling being around examples of inclusivity where there have been success stories and sharing that and celebrating that, so that it actually becomes the lived experience of the leaders and the rest of the organisation can follow.
Yeah, very true. Thank you so much indeed, Laurie. Malini, final thoughts on this one?
Leon, I totally understand what you mean by how can an organization help teams find a diamond in the rough. And I believe that one of the reasons that these diamonds stay hidden is because organizations are so risk averse that they're not willing to give someone a go unless they're already a polished diamond. Right? So creating a culture where people feel safe to try, as they say, fail forward or fail fast, etc. I think that would actually be a really helpful thing.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Thank you so much indeed. Well, what a fascinating question, Leon. Thank you very much indeed for raising it to the panel today. So over on social, we've got a few kind of comments to be able to touch on. Our question, of course, to the audience was, what do you think about using tools? Raj Khanna, thank you so much for joining us today, Raj. I know you personally, and it's really interesting to hear you say this because Raj, by the way, teaches a whole range of different leading practice, best practice type courses to professional candidates and course participants and so on. And he's saying that, we need to get away from using the shorthand of acronyms. Unless we do so, anyone joining the party late will not feel part of the team. And I completely agree with that, Raj. We use this shorthand and we forget that other people are not actually following us along. So thank you for that comment. A couple of other answers that we've got as well. We've got one here from a LinkedIn user. Thank you so much. Tools can be many things and can provide both tangible and intangible value. Both are just as important as each other. And I agree with that. It's a lot is this combination of, not just the tool, but also the interpretation of what the tool is showing you and having the space and time to be able to work with others to facilitate their understanding. And just some confirmation back again from Shanice to Charlotte about thinking about using those tools in that way. Thank you very much indeed to everybody on LinkedIn for your thinking on that. I do apologise, Suchitra, if we may. Let's move on. We'll take our next question for the panel.
Sure. We have a question from Sven. How can we include the many generations that we have now in the organizations, as they all have a different perspective on the workplace?
This is a really good question, Sven. Thank you for raising it. We often like to categorize generations by using alphabetic letters towards the end of the alphabet. I'm not quite sure why they started there, but we're going to run out very soon, aren't we? Laurie, start us off, please, and then we're going to mix it up a little bit. We'll go and we'll hear from Daniëlle next.
Yeah, thank you for this question, Sven. It's an interesting one, and it's almost leads on from the diamond in the rough question a little bit earlier on. So I think there's a real opportunity for organisations to be proactively seeking out those diamonds in the rough. So people from maybe younger generations who, through ordinary process or traditional processes, may not rise to leadership roles in the hierarchy, but giving them opportunities to have influence and that sort of thing earlier on, particularly with the rate of change that we're seeing in today's society, and in particular when it comes to digitisation and technology. I think there might be room for more open-mindedness to be actively seeking out people from different generations for all sorts of reasons, so that they can have a voice and more influence at a leadership level.
Mm-hmm. It's been quite fascinating, I think, Laurie, to see how different leaders have responded post-pandemic around the world. Some organisations have insisted that everybody returns to the office, that they return to the kind of 9-to-5 working, that they return to the organisational design that was actually thought up during the Industrial Revolution. to make sure that workers arrived at certain times, and that the machinery was kept going and kept running 24 hours a day so that productivity could be at its highest and so on. Quite fascinating that others have taken a very different approach. So you're absolutely right. Very, very interesting to see how different leaders have approached this kind of current situation. Daniëlle, let's hear from you, please, and then Adrian.
Well, Nick, we have now Gen Z, but we're starting at the beginning of the alphabet again. We're now talking about Generation Alpha, and then everything that's coming next. But I think it's so important that also in the different generations, everyone has a voice. And I was referring to at the question before, we need reverse mentoring. And I speak from my age, we have to listen to the younger generation because they are the future. But we also have a lot of wisdom to share. So I'm such a big advocate of reverse mentoring. 1 hour, I listen to the younger people who have their say and educate me what's going on in their world. And the other session, they have to listen to me and I can share from my experience. And I think companies who don't do that, that's very dangerous and that is not good. And as a leader, you have to walk the talk. You have to show that you listen to everyone, whether it's gender, whether it's background, whether it's younger generations. It's of the utmost importance.
Thank you very much indeed. What a brilliant insight and a call to action for all of us to make sure that we're getting that input. And reverse mentoring, I love that phrase. So fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Daniëlle. Adrian, your thoughts, then we'll go to Dianne.
Well, I'm old and therefore completely wise. Goodness me, that's so not true. There are some tendencies that happen in different organizations. You'll get people who are, shall we say, my age, towards my 50s and 60s, who are kind of put out to grass and therefore not listened to. You've equally got the tendency for old white hairs like me to say we're not listening to the youngsters coming through to the organization because we do know best, and we so often don't. So that, first of all, again, needs to be recognized. But also, I think it's important for young professionals coming in. I would, back in the late 1970s into the 80s, when I was starting my career, I would never dared to have questioned my elders and betters. Whereas I look at my nieces, nephews, and their generation, and they'll question like anything, but which is absolutely right, but needs to be tempered. And again, they need to be coached and mentored in, they don't know everything yet, and they've got stuff to learn. And we need to learn how to harness their potential, but also, help them learn how to work well and behave well in organizations and collaborate, etc. So there's lots of learning to do and lots of coaching to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. One of the takeaways from, I think it's from the concept of lean manufacturing, it's almost a philosophy really, is to go and ask questions, why do we do this and so on, but to do it respectfully. And often coaching, when earlier in my career as a consultant, I imagined that I had the answers. As I progressed in my career, I realized that actually it's much better to know the question to ask. And if you can ask the right question, then you'll get a better answer. And that took me years to make that transition. Now, other colleagues have made that transition much earlier in their careers, and they're far more capable than I am. But it's that kind of coaching, I agree with you, to help people who are early career start to consider, how do you ask those kinds of questions respectfully so that you get better answers? Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Dianne, final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I agree with Laurie about being open-minded, and with Danielle's contribution about listening, because listening is important so that you can learn from persons irrespective of which generation they are from. And you can also establish teams with persons from many different generations so that you can tap into their experience, their knowledge, their lessons learned, and you can then use this to make better decisions for the organization.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you so much indeed, Dianne. So some fantastic questions to that. Some fantastic answers, rather, to that question, Sven. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we're starting to run short of time a little bit, panel, so we are going to have to pick up the pace a wee bit. So, Suchitra, let's take our next question, please, if we can.
We have a live question from Charlotte Miller. We talk about building a culture of inclusivity. However, is it something that should be mandatory in every organization?
Now, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Can you almost prescribe that we're all going to be inclusive? Does that actually work in real life? Adrian?
No. It's
okay.
If an organization doesn't, it will become a competitive advantage or disadvantage, and probably a competitive disadvantage. So, but no, I would never.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Absolutely. Dianne, your thoughts then, Daniëlle?
So inclusivity can be made mandatory via core values where you show your priority through action. But inclusivity is really a way of thinking. So it's about getting people on board and wanting to have inclusivity in your organization.
Absolutely right. Thank you very much indeed. Daniëlle, and then Laurie.
Just to, throw it over the fence and say, now be inclusive from today on. Now it's not going to work. But I think, as Dianne said, you can talk about core values, about the way we treat each other, we listen to each other. And if you give the people some habits that you implement, like listening circles or whatever, I think that's very helpful. Though there is a part that can be mandatory, and you have to walk the talk as leaders in a company.
Thank you so much. And Laurie, final thoughts?
I'll just add that it's really about having an appropriate level of inclusivity. So, and generally, the more complex and the more impactful the initiatives that you're working in and your organisation, the greater the level of inclusivity you're going to need to be mindful of.
Yeah, and I think the challenge here is that with greater digitalisation, I think that leaders, managers, everybody's looking to dashboard things. So, you can have a dashboard of how many widgets were manufactured today. You can have a dashboard that says, how are we managing our debt book? You can have a dashboard that says, what is our productivity overall? What's our profitability overall? It's tricky to find a dashboard to tell you how inclusive you are, because you really need to look beyond the obvious. And one thing that I would say to you is that there is a little quiet voice in all of us in that meeting. There's a quiet voice in all of us with the voice of common sense, which is trying to get through. But the voice of common sense is often drowned out by the noisy people in the room. So here's our personal call to action in the meetings that you're in today, that we are in today, or for those of you joining from Australia, perhaps the meetings that you are in tomorrow. Give some thought to how do we get those quiet voices heard in the meetings that we're attending? What can we do to reach out to somebody who's listened and not contributed in that meeting? It may be the wrong thing to invite them to speak out loud, but it probably is a thing that we should consider it and think about how next time can we construct a framework for a meeting where those quiet voices can be heard, and so therefore pull forward our real lived experience of inclusivity. Excellent. Let's move on. Suchitra, I think we're running out of time, so we may just have to restrain ourselves a little bit and take our final question.
Our last question is from James. I saw teams become more inclusive over the pandemic. when the organization was facing challenges and access to leadership increased. How can we maintain this?
There was something of a kind of a spirit, wasn't there, of unity that developed out of adversity. And I do wonder if that has been sustainable, if ever it is sustainable. Daniëlle, why don't you start us off, and then we'll hear from Malini.
Beautiful question, because during the pandemic, we had a commonality. We're all on the same boat. We all had to work with home, not from home, but with home, with the dogs, with the children, with the partners, with whatever. We're all on the same boat, and we all had the same space on the screen in the conversation. So there was a little bit more equality. We knew about their pets, their Wi-Fi connection, if it's good or bad, etc., etc. And this feeling of commonality, if you manage to keep that up now, because we see that that is a big driver of working together and have an inclusive culture, we're all on the same page, we're all on the same boat, and try to keep that up.
Thank you very much indeed. What a great call to action there. We had equality, and we learned more about even things like their pets and their Wi-Fi connections. Certainly learned a lot about pets and Wi-Fi, that's for sure. Thank you very much indeed. Malini, and then Dianne.
James, thank you for such a beautiful question. I think one of the things that I'm seeing is that organizations are actually recognizing that we came together and we have been working in a more inclusive way during the pandemic. And I'm seeing organizations use the phrase "stronger together" as a call to action to continue working in that way. Right? So some of the things that you can think about are, what is it that actually led to that feeling of inclusivity? And Daniëlle certainly outlined some of those. At the heart of all of that, I think we actually learned to stop judging others. Right? We actually became a lot more accepting of different people in their various situations, because we're all riding the same storm. And I think if we can just continue with that, find ways to stop judging people and accepting them for who they are, we'll be well on our way to a more inclusive society.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Some lovely ideas there. Dianne, your thoughts, please, and then Adrian.
So how we can continue to maintain inclusivity is to provide different fora by which employees can provide feedback on many different aspects which are being experienced. And also, as Laurie had mentioned, initially being open-minded. So at the leadership level, you need to be open-minded so that you can take into account different perspectives of different employees to now put together in your decision-making process so that the best decision for the organization can be made.
Thank you very much indeed. Adrian, and then Laurie.
Returning to an earlier point, and it's back to the board. It's for them to be saying what the new, if you like, culture is going to be. I see a great deal of hybrid working now. So there are fantastic lessons, as has been said, to learn from all the remote working to be done, and building on those lessons, but deliberately building the ways of working the organization needs to do, and inclusivity, etc. Although sometimes let's not forget that just occasionally you need directive leadership in particularly, say, emergency situations. But there are ways and ways of still leading directly without steamrollering people. So
it's an important thing, isn't it? You do need to give confidence, don't you, in times of crises, and that can require situational leadership, which is a little different to how you might go about doing that, once the storm has passed. Laurie, final thoughts on this, please.
Oh, I agree with everything that's been said. The only thing I'd add is that adversity is always a great opportunity for a learning experience. So to have a learning culture where you're continuously looking to learn from these events, knowing that the pandemic was not the last pandemic that the human race is going to face, understanding that there will be adversity. We've got climate change challenges in the future. So let's learn from what worked well, and create a pathway so that in the future we'll be inclusive and use different tools and techniques as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's quite interesting to note in the past that you have organisations who had to blow the dust off their crisis management, their business resilience, their business continuity plans. Whatever phrase was used, they had to blow the dust off those. There were other organisations who seemed to be able to rally very quickly and embrace what was happening. And it was seamless, virtually seamless. Now, I'm sure it was not seamless underneath the surface of the water. There was a lot of paddling going on. But nevertheless, to witness that happening in real time was absolutely amazing. So, very interesting. Well, thank you, panel. And what a fascinating show it has been today. We're now going to hear closing remarks as we're running out of time. So Laurie, we'll come to you first and then Daniëlle.
Just in closing, I think just generally, if we can all become more inclusive, it's going to help us be more resilient and deal with all of the challenges that we're likely to face in the future. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Daniëlle, then Dianne.
Companies, just take an example of this Level Up shows. We're now a panel with so many different backgrounds, upbringing, cultures. All our voices are being heard. We all had a seat at the table. We were able to dance. So our voices were respectfully heard. So this is a wonderful example. And from my side, a big thank you to you, Nick, Suchitra, Nigel. Big thanks to all the panelists. I learned a lot. And of course, the audience with all the beautiful questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Daniëlle, we try really hard. We don't always get there, but we do try very hard indeed. Thank you indeed. Dianne and then Malini.
So inclusion is a social responsibility, but it can also contribute to the financial performance of the organization. And research has shown that more diverse companies were able to increase their profitability by 36% than less diverse companies. So also justifying the need for inclusivity. So very interesting show with a lot of interesting questions. And I learned a lot from my fellow panelists. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Dianne. Thank you for joining us today. Malini and then Adrian.
Inclusion is a topic that's very close to my heart. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Something that we did not touch on during this hour is intersectionality. And so I would encourage everyone who is listening to this to actually learn more about the different forms of diversity and how they can intersect, because sometimes organizations tend to stereotype different diversity as well.
Yes.
Right? So, and that's something that we are becoming more aware of. So please read up on that. There's plenty of material available, and I'm always happy to have a chat.
Yeah, thank you, Malini. I'm just making a note of that. You called it intersectionality. So I'm going to follow up on that with you. I will reach out to you. And I know the other panelists feel the same way. For everybody who's watching, our LinkedIn biographies there's a little button on the APMG International website for today's event. Just click on that, and then that will take you through, and you'll be able to request a connection with Malini, with Adrian, with Daniëlle, with Dianne, and with Laurie, or indeed myself. So please do use that and invite us to connect. Probably best not to try and sell us something straight afterwards. But then I don't think if you're watching the show, you're falling into that category, okay? If you're actually watching the show, I think we're quite safe. All right, very good. Thank you very much, Malini. Adrian, final thoughts?
Just picking up what Malini has just said, she's absolutely right. Diversity is about the full diversity, sort of ethnic, lifestyle, etc., etc. Being gay, I would echo that. But my final thought is almost a return to my theme for today, is that I've never really seen a culture, a positive culture that's been built from the bottom up, that's been sustained. It's got to be recognized, again, the head and the heart by the board, and driven and sustained by them.
Very, very important. Thank you so much indeed, Adrian. And thank you for your contribution today as your first Level Up episode. Suchitra, your final thoughts for today, please.
Another great show, Nick. Thank you to the panelists and our viewers for some excellent questions. I've learned a lot today, so thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you on behalf of the audience to all of our panelists. And also on behalf of the panelists, thank you to the audience for your amazing questions. Looking forward then, over on our website, you can search for answers to more than 1,500 questions of the that have been answered previously on Level Up and on many other shows and activities. It's comprehensive, it's totally free, and really does help you connect with more than 170 experts from all over the world. You can also listen to the audio versions of the shows on your preferred podcast platform. And of course, please do take a moment now to like, comment, share, and subscribe, particularly on our YouTube channel if you would. It really doesn't cost you anything at all. And it helps new people to discover our content. So we'd really appreciate that. Now, further forwards then, what's coming up next? Today is actually the beginning of the World BRM Week, Business Relationship Management Week. And there's lots of activities and events taking place around the world, online and in person. So do look that up on the APMG International website. Join us this Friday, the 10th at 2 p.m. GMT as we explore careers in service management. Nigel, I think, is going to be hosting that show before we return to how to become a business relationship manager on Monday the 13th, which is a show at 8 a.m. GMT hosted by Stefan Brendel. All details are over on apmginternational.com. Subscribe to the show and we'll send you a personal summary of what's coming up and how you too can join us here on the panel and level up your career with APMG. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you next time.